On the morning of September 10, 1858, in St. Mary Parish, Louisiana, a housemaid discovered her master's mutilated body in his bedroom. Blood soaked through the mattress, pulling on the hard wood floor beneath. Between his legs, where manhood once was, remained only a gaping wound and the rusty smell of death. Before noon, 4 more bodies were discovered across 3 neighboring plantations. All white men, all wealthy, all castrated before dying, all murdered within 7 consecutive nights by the same pair of hands. Hands that had picked cotton, cooked meals, and endured 156 sexual assaults over 3 years. Her name was Delilah. She was 28 years old, and she had decided that if the law wouldn't protect her, she would become her own justice. But this story doesn't begin with revenge. It begins 10 years earlier when beauty became a curse. In 1848, Delilah was 18 years old when Master Borgard Whitmore III purchased her at the New Orleans slave auction on Chartres Street. She cost $1,800, 3 times the price of an average field hand. The reason was simple and brutal. She was beautiful, tall, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Delilah had the kind of beauty that made white men stop mid-sentence. Her mother, who'd been sold away when Delilah was 12, had once whispered a terrible truth. Pretty slave girls don't pick cotton, baby. They suffer differently. Mama had been right. Whitmore's plantation, Riverside Hall, sprawled across 3,400 acres of Louisiana's most fertile soil in St. Mary Parish. 200 slaves worked the cotton fields that made Whitmore one of the wealthiest men in the state. The plantation produced 800 bales of cotton annually, each bale worth $50 on the market. King Cotton ruled Louisiana, and men like Whitmore wore crowns built on blackbacks. The big house stood 3 stories tall, white columns gleaming in the merciless southern sun. Magnolia trees lined the drive. Slave quarters, 40 cramped cabins sat half a mile behind, far enough that screams wouldn't disturb white folks' sleep. Delilah's job was simple on paper: house servant. She cooked, cleaned, served meals, and attended to Mistress Prudence Whitmore's every whim. Reality was far more complicated. Within 3 weeks of her purchase, Master Whitmore visited her cabin after midnight. She was still a virgin. She wouldn't be bite on. "Don't fight," he'd whispered. Whiskey breath hot against her face. Makes it worse, she didn't fight. She learned quickly that resistance earned whippings. Submission earned survival, but Whitmore didn't keep her to himself. Every Friday evening, 5 men gathered at Riverside Hall for dinner and business. Discussions about cotton prices, slave management, and crop yields. These weren't just neighbors, they were Louisiana's elite, bound by wealth and shared depravity. Master Borgard Whitmore III, 52, owner of Riverside Hall, 2nd-generation plantation master, who'd inherited 200 slaves and doubled that number through breeding programs. Diabetic, prone to rage, sadistic even by slaveholder standards, had personally branded 63 slaves with his initials. Kept detailed ledgers tracking which slave women were most fertile. Montgomery Caldwell, 48, neighboring plantation owner of Sweetwater estate. 150 slaves, sugarcane operation, widowed twice. Both wives died under mysterious circumstances. Known for preferring very young slave girls. The other masters joked he liked them before they bled. Dr. Thaddeus Peabody, 55, local physician who conducted medical experiments on slaves without anesthesia, justified it as advancing science and claimed black people felt less pain than whites due to thicker skin and primitive nervous systems, had amputated limbs, removed organs, and performed vivisections on living slaves, published papers in Southern medical journals using this research. Cornelius Rutherford, 44, professional slave trader who traveled a circuit through Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, separated over 200 families during his career, sold children as young as 5 away from their mothers, personally raped female slaves before auctions to test the merchandise, had scars on his face from a slave woman who fought back. He'd burned her alive in retaliation. Jacob Blackwood, 38. Overseer at Riverside Hall. Poor white from Tennessee, who'd clawed his way to a position of power, the most brutal of the five, used the whipping post daily, often exceeding 100 lashes, had crippled 3 slaves by cutting their Achilles tendons for running too slow, took pleasure in watching slaves suffer. These 5 men had an arrangement. After their Friday business dinners, after the bourbon flowed and cigars were lit, they'd retire to the parlor. Then one of them would request a slave woman, usually Delilah. She was passed between them like property because that's exactly what she was under Louisiana law, a thing, a tool, less than human in their eyes, despite being fully human in her suffering. The first time all 5 used her in one night, Delilah was 19 years old. She bled for 3 days afterward. No one cared. There was no doctor for slave women except Dr. Peabody, who'd examine her only to ensure she could still function. This continued for 3 years, 156 times by Delilah's count. She kept track using notches carved on the underside of her cabin's floorboard where no one would see. Each notch represented a violation. Each notch was a promise she would remember. Delilah learned to dissociate during the assaults. Her body remained in that room while her mind traveled to Africa, a place she'd never seen but felt in her bones. Her grandmother had been brought on a slave ship from Yorubaland in 1791. The stories, songs, and spirit survived even if the language didn't. During the day, she performed her duties perfectly. She smiled when required, said, "Yes, master," with just the right amount of deference, cooked elaborate meals, served tea to Mistress Whitmore and her gossiping friends. She became invisible, the way smart slaves learned to disappear in plain sight. But on Friday nights, when those 5 men's eyes landed on her, she couldn't hide. Beauty was a spotlight burning her alive. Other slaves knew, but couldn't help. Speaking up meant death. Old Moses, the elderly blacksmith who'd been at Riverside Hall for 40 years, once tried to comfort her. "Child, I've seen this evil my whole life," he whispered one Sunday after the secret prayer meeting in the woods. "Seen pretty girls like you suffer in ways field hands don't. Ain't right. Ain't never been right. But you strong, you surviving, that's something." Delilah had nodded, but inside she wondered, was survival enough? Was breathing while dying inside truly life? Then came 1858, and the answer crystallized. No, if you're feeling rage building in your chest right now, you should. This was real. These men existed. This system was legal, protected, and celebrated throughout the American South. Delilah's story is one of thousands, most never documented, never avenged, never remembered. Leave a like if you believe her anger was justified, because what comes next is the storm that rage built. June 1858 brought suffocating heat to Louisiana, the kind that made air thick as molasses and temper short. Cotton grew tall in the fields, profits soared, and Delilah realized she was pregnant again. This was her 3rd pregnancy in 10 years. The first had ended violently, forced abortions administered by Dr. Peabody using crude instruments and no anesthesia. "Can't have bastards cluttering up the corridors," Whitmore had said as if her children were trash to be discarded. Both times Delilah had hemorrhage. Both times she'd nearly died. Both times she'd grieved alone because slave women weren't permitted to mourn half-white babies. But this time felt different. This time her body held on. By July, her belly began to show. Mistress Prudence Whitmore noticed first. "You're bleeding," she said coldly during morning tea service. Not a question, an accusation. Delilah stood frozen, silver teapot trembling in her hands. "Who's the father?" Mistress Whitmore's voice was ice. The question was absurd. Delilah wanted to laugh, to scream, to say, "Which of your husband's friends?" "I couldn't possibly know. They've all used me." Instead, she whispered, "I don't know, ma'am." Mistress Whitmore's face flushed crimson, infidelity she could handle. White men's indiscretions with slave women were expected, even acceptable in Southern society. But pregnancy made it visible, public, embarrassing. She called for her husband. Master Whitmore entered the parlor, still in riding boots from morning inspection. When he saw Delilah's pregnant belly, his expression darkened. "Whose is it?" he demanded. She claims not to know. Mistress Whitmore spat. "Your Friday companions. No doubt. This is what happens when you share property so freely." For a moment, something flickered in Whitmore's eyes. Was it shame, recognition of his own monstrosity? But it vanished quickly, replaced by cold fury. "You've disgraced this household," he told Delilah as if she'd had any choice in the matter. "Tomorrow at dawn, you'll receive 100 lashes at the whipping post. Let every slave see what happens to women who spread their legs for multiple men." The irony, the vicious, cruel irony, nearly broke Delilah's composure. She'd spread her legs for no one. They'd been forced apart 156 times, but she said nothing. Slaves who talked back died. That night in her cabin, Delilah carved the 156th notch into her floorboard. Then she sat in darkness, hands on her small belly, and whispered to the baby growing inside, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She knew the whipping would kill it. That was the point. Dawn broke blood red on August 2nd, 1858. All 200 slaves were forced to attend. Whitmore's standard practice for public punishments. "They need to see," he always said. "Fear keeps them in line." The whipping post stood in the center of the yard between big house and quarters, a permanent reminder of white power. The wood was stained dark from years of blood. Jacob Blackwood, the overseer, secured Delilah's wrists to the iron rings. Her back faced the crowd. Mistress Whitmore watched from the big house veranda, satisfaction on her face. The 5 men who'd violated Delilah stood together smoking cigars. Dr. Peabody, Montgomery Caldwell, Cornelius Rutherford, all visiting for business, though really they'd come to watch. "Count them," Whitmore commanded. The first lash came like lightning, bullwhip cracking across Delilah's back with a sound that echoed across the plantation. Her dress tore, skin split. One, the slaves called out, forced to participate in her torture. Second lash, blood began to flow. 2, Delilah bit her lips so hard it bled. She wouldn't scream, wouldn't give them that satisfaction. By the 20th lash, her dress was ribbons. By the 40th, her back was raw meat. By the 60th, she'd lost consciousness twice and been revived with buckets of cold water. At lash 73, she felt it. A sharp tearing pain in her belly, distinct from the agony on her back. Wetness flooded down her legs. Not water, blood, the baby. She was losing the baby. 74, more blood. Cramping so intense she vomited. 75. The baby, her 3rd child, died while she hung from the whipping post. Died to the count of lashes. Died while 5 men watched. The same 5 who might have been its father. Through the haze of pain, Delilah heard laughter. Master Whitmore was laughing. Problem solved, he said to Dr. Peabody. To birds, 1 stone. Punishment and abortion, problem solved. Her child, a human life, was a problem now solved. Something inside Delilah died with that baby. Not hope, she'd lost hope years ago, but fear. The fear that kept slaves obedient, the fear of punishment, of pain, of death. All of it burned away, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous, clarity. They reached 100 lashes. Delilah was cut down unconscious. 2 slave women carried her back to her cabin, where she bled for 2 days. No doctor came. She survived through sheer stubbornness and something else, purpose. On the 3rd day, when she could finally stand, Delilah made a promise to the spirits of her 3 dead children, and to every ancestor who suffered in chains. She would kill them, all 5 of them, and she would make sure they died knowing exactly why. Recovery took 2 weeks. Delilah spent that time planning. She had advantages the masters didn't recognize. As a house servant, she had access to all 5 men's homes at different times. Caldwell often borrowed her for dinner service when his own cook was ill. Dr. Peabody used her to clean his medical office. Rutherford requested her company, code for rape. Blackwood lived in a cabin on Riverside Hall property. She knew his routines intimately. And Whitmore, she cooked every meal he ate. Delilah was intelligent, far more than any of them suspected. She'd secretly learned to read by watching Whitmore's children during their lessons, memorizing letters and words. She'd studied Dr. Peabody's medical texts when cleaning his office, learning anatomy, understanding where to cut to cause maximum pain or guarantee death. She knew their schedules, their habits, their vulnerabilities. Master Whitmore, diabetic, required strict diet. Drank bourbon heavily every night alone in his study from 9 o'clock p.m. to 11 p.m. Slept in the master bedroom, 3rd floor, door locked, but window accessible via trellis. Mistress slept in separate room. They hadn't shared a bed in years. Montgomery called well. Widower living alone at Sweetwater estate. House staff minimal. Drank laudanum every night for nerves. Often invited Delilah over on Wednesday evenings when lonely, trusted her completely. After all, she was just property. Dr. Peabody worked late in medical office 3 nights per week, kept detailed notes on his experiments. Office door never locked. Arrogance made him careless. Surgical instruments everywhere, slept in room above the office. Cornelius Rutherford visited Riverside Hall every other week during circuit. Slept in guest room. Ground floor, window facing slave quarters. Snored loudly, heavy sleeper, kept pistol under pillow, but was too drunk most nights to reach it in time. Jacob Blackwood, most predictable, drank himself unconscious every Saturday night in the barn after beating slaves all week, slept alone. No wife, no family, other slaves hated him. They'd help, or at least stay silent. Delilah decided on a sequence. Blackwood first easiest, least smart. Then Rutherford visiting soon, limited time window. Then Peabody strategic. Steal his medical knowledge to improve technique. Then Caldwell isolated, vulnerable. Then finally, Whitmore, the main target, deserved to die knowing all his friends were dead first. 7 nights, 1 per night with 2 nights gap to avoid detection patterns. The method revealed itself when Delilah was cleaning Dr. Peabody's office and found his anatomy text open to a chapter on male genitalia. The illustrations were detailed. The description of blood vessels, nerve clusters, and the consequences of severing specific tissues was precise. She understood instantly. They violated her with those parts of their anatomy. Those parts would be her weapon of justice, symbolic and practical. Castration caused intense pain, psychological devastation, and if done correctly, fatal blood loss. She wouldn't make their manhood before unmaking their lives. Delilah stole a butcher knife from Riverside Hall's kitchen, 10 inches of carbon steel, sharp enough to cut through bone. She hid it in a hollow section of her cabin's floorboard wrapped in oilcloth to prevent rust. She practiced on potatoes first, then on a recently deceased pig, claimed it for meat preparation. She learned the angle, the pressure, the cutting motion required. She calculated blood loss timelines based on Peabody's texts. For 1 week, Delilah was the model slave, obedient, quiet, efficient. No one suspected the storm building behind her eyes. On Saturday night, September 30, 1858, she retrieved the knife from its hiding place, tucked it into the folds of her dress, and walked toward the barn where Jacob Blackwood was already passed out drunk. The moon was a thin crescent. Good. Darkness would hide everything. Delilah stood outside the barn for exactly 1 minute, listening to Blackwood's drunken snores. She thought of the 3 children she never held, of the 156 violations carved into her floorboard, of every slave woman who suffered what she suffered and never gotten justice. Then she stepped inside. Pause here for a moment. What's about to happen is brutal. It's violent. It's real. Delilah wasn't a monster. She was a woman pushed past every human limit, forced to become her own justice system because no law would protect her. If you believe her rage was righteous, leave a like. If you think you'd have done the same, comment below, because this is where survival becomes resistance and resistance becomes revolution. Jacob Blackwood lay on his back in the hay, fully clothed, reeking of whiskey and tobacco. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the barn walls, painting silver stripes across his unconscious face. Delilah approached silently, knife in hand. She knelt beside him, studying his face. Even in sleep, it was cruel, thin lips perpetually curved in a sneer. Scar across his left cheek from a fight, skin weathered and reddened from years in Louisiana sun. This man had whipped her 43 times over 3 years, had called her breeder bitch, had watched her lose her baby 2 weeks ago, and laughed. Delilah reached into her pocket and pulled out a rag torn from an old shirt, watertight. She'd need it soon. She placed her left hand over Blackwood's mouth, pressing hard. He woke instantly, eyes flying open in confusion. He tried to sit up, but Delilah was already moving. She jammed the rag into his mouth before he could scream, muffling his sounds to desperate grunts. His hands clawed at her arms. She'd expected that. Field work made slave women strong. Shh, she whispered, pressing the knife blade against his throat. Not cutting, just pressure enough to stop his struggling. You move, I cut. Understand? Blackwood's eyes were wild, bulging. He nodded frantically. Good. Delilah shifted position, straddling his chest to pin him down. At 5'9", she had leverage, and desperation made her vicious. 3 weeks ago, she said quietly, you whipped me while I was pregnant. Do you remember? Blackwood made muffled sounds behind the gag. I lost my baby because of you, because of Whitmore, because of all of you. She moved the knife downward, trailing it along his chest, his stomach. Blackwood followed the blade's path with terrified eyes. You like using this part. Delilah continued, knife now resting on his groin. Used it on me. Used it on Clara, on Mary, on Ruth, on girls young enough to be your daughters. The blade pressed harder. Blackwood tried to buck her off, but she was ready. She slammed her elbow into his throat. Cutting off air, he went still, gasping. Tonight you lose that privilege. In one swift motion, Delilah sliced through his pants. Blackwood screamed into the gag, a high, inhuman sound of terror. Quiet, she hissed. No one's coming to save you. No law, no God, just like no one came for me. What happened next took 4 minutes. Dr. Peabody's medical text had been precise. Sever the dorsal artery, cut through the corpora, remove the testicles by cutting through the spermatic cords. Blackwood would bleed out in approximately 12 minutes if no intervention occurred. None would. Delilah worked with the focused efficiency of someone who practiced. Blackwood thrashed, but he was pinned, gagged, and rapidly weakening from blood loss. She didn't look away, didn't close her eyes, watched every second. This is for my first baby, she whispered. The one Peabody cut out of me in 1851. Cut. This is for my second baby. 1854. Cut. This is for the baby I lost 2 weeks ago. Cut. Blackwood's muffled screams turned to whimpers, then to wet gurgling sounds. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into hay. His eyes rolled back. Delilah sat with him for 12 minutes, watching him die. She counted each minute, each breath that grew shallower. When his chest stopped moving, she checked his pulse. Nothing. She cleaned the knife on his pants, rewrapped it in oilcloth, and stood. Her dress was spattered with blood, but she'd brought a spare hidden earlier behind hay bales. She changed quickly, bundled the bloody dress, and left the barn. Outside, the plantation slept, crickets sang. Somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird called. Delilah walked back to her cabin, buried the bloody dress in a pre-dug hole beneath her floorboard, and lay down on her cot. Her hands didn't shake. She felt nothing, not satisfaction, not horror, just emptiness and a grim sense of completion. One down, 4 to go. She closed her eyes and slept dreamlessly. Sunday morning brought chaos. A field hand discovered Blackwood's body at dawn when sent to wake him for breakfast. His screams brought everyone running. Overseers, house slaves, and eventually Master Whitmore himself. The scene was carnage. Blackwood's body lay in dried blood, pants torn, mutilated beyond decency. Flies already swarmed. Whitmore vomited, even hardened by years of inflicting violence. This was different. Who? He couldn't finish the sentence. Sheriff Thomas Johnson was summoned from Franklin, 12 miles away. He arrived by noon with 2 deputies and a doctor. The investigation was cursory. Dr. Peabody examined the body. Ironic, even he'd be examined the same way soon enough. Methodical, Peabody noted, kneeling in hay. Whoever did this understood anatomy, knew exactly where to cut. This wasn't rage. This was surgical, a slave. Sheriff Johnson asked. Impossible, Whitmore said immediately. They're animals. This requires intelligence. The sheriff wasn't so sure. Any slaves with medical knowledge. Some of the women work with midwifery, Whitmore admitted, but they're supervised. Question them all, Johnson ordered. Every slave. Someone saw something. The interrogations lasted all day Sunday. 200 slaves individually questioned. Standard technique, threats, occasional whippings to encourage honesty, promises of rewards for information. No one talked because no one knew. Delilah had been careful. When Sheriff Johnson questioned her, she stood with perfect posture, eyes downcast. Where were you Saturday night? In my cabin, sir. Anyone verify that? Other women in neighboring cabins might have heard me singing spirituals before sleep. Sir, we do that most nights. It was true. Slave women often sang in the quarters. Johnson had no way to verify or disprove her claim. You work in the house. You have access to knives. Yes, sir. Kitchen knives. All accounted for, sir. Master Whitmore checks inventory every evening. Also true. The knife she'd used was never in official inventory. She'd stolen it weeks ago during a delivery from the supply merchant, then reported it broken and discarded. Johnson stared at her for a long moment. Delilah kept her expression neutral, subservient. If you hear anything, he said finally. You report it. Understand? Yes, sir. She was dismissed. As she walked away, Sheriff Johnson turned to Whitmore. Keep close watch. Whoever did this might not be done. How right he was. Monday night, September 5th, 1858. Cornelius Rutherford arrived at Riverside Hall as scheduled. His bi-weekly visit to evaluate and purchase slaves for upcoming auctions in Baton Rouge. He brought chains, ledgers, and his usual predatory energy. Dinner was tense. The overseer's murder hung over everything, but business continued. Southern gentlemen didn't let one dead overseer disrupt profit. After dinner, Rutherford retired to the ground floor guest room at 10 p.m. He was tired from travel and drunk from bourbon. He fell asleep within minutes. At 1:20 a.m., Delilah picked the simple lock on his door using a bent hairpin, a skill she'd learned from old Moses years ago. The door swung open silently. She'd oiled the hinges that afternoon during cleaning. Rutherford snored loudly, sprawled across the bed. His pistol lay on the nightstand, within reach, but useless to an unconscious man. Delilah moved quickly. She grabbed the pistol first, a precaution, and set it on the far side of the room. Then she pulled out her knife and a length of rope stolen from the barn. She had to be fast. This time she couldn't risk extended torture. Too close to occupied rooms, she straddled Rutherford and clamped her hand over his mouth. He woke with a start, eyes flying open. Before he could process what was happening, she pressed the knife to his throat. You sold my first baby, she whispered. 5 years old. Sold him to a cotton plantation in Mississippi. Do you remember? Rutherford's eyes widened in recognition, not of the specific transaction he'd sold hundreds of children, but of the danger he was in. I have one question, Delilah continued. Did he cry when you chained him? She removed her hand briefly. Rutherford gasped. Please, I'll pay freedom. Anything. Delilah shoved the gag in his mouth. Wrong answer. He did cry. I heard him screaming my name as your wagon drove away. He was 5 years old. She tied the gag tight, then bound his hands to the bedposts with the rope. He struggled, but she learned from Blackwood. Speed and positioning were everything. You won't die quickly, she told him. That would be mercy, and you deserve none. The castration was faster this time. practice improved technique. But she didn't kill him immediately. Instead, she left him bleeding, conscious, terrified. "I want you to feel what you've done," she said. "Every child you tore from their mother, every family you destroyed. Feel it all." She sat in the chair beside the bed, knife resting on her lap, and watched him bleed. Rutherford thrashed weakly, trying to free himself. Impossible. The ropes held. 20 minutes passed. His movements slowed, eyes glazed. "Almost over," Delilah said softly. "My son probably cried for 20 minutes after you took him, so this is fair." At the 23-minute mark, Rutherford stopped breathing. Delilah checked his pulse. Dead. She cleaned up quickly, untied the ropes, taking them with her, and slipped out of the room. The hallway was dark. Big House slept. She returned to her cabin, hid the knife, and lay down. 2 days, 2 men, 3 to go. Tuesday night, September 6th. Doctor. Thaddeus Peabody. His medical office sat on the ground floor of his plantation house, separate entrance always unlocked. "Emergencies don't wait for keys," he'd once said, proud of his dedication to medicine while ignoring his crimes against humanity. Peabody worked late on Tuesdays, reviewing notes from his experiments. Delilah knew because she cleaned his office every Wednesday morning at 2 o'clock a.m. She entered through the unlocked door. Peabody sat at his desk, back to the entrance, reading by lamplight. He didn't hear her approach. Years of moving silently made slaves invisible. Delilah spoke from directly behind him. "Good evening, Doctor." Peabody spun in his chair, startled. "Delilah, what are you?" He saw the knife. Understanding dawned. Wait. She was already moving. One hand clamped over his mouth. The other pressed the blade to his throat. "You cut two babies out of me," she said quietly. "No anesthesia. You said I felt less pain because I was black." Remember, Peabody's eyes were wide with terror. "Tonight, I'll use your own methods. No anesthesia." After all, her voice dripped with venom. "If white men feel less pain than they claim black women do, you'll be fine." She forced him to the floor using the same techniques he'd used to restrain uncooperative slave patients during his experiments. Poetic justice. Delilah had studied his instruments. Scalpels, bone saws, forceps. She selected a scalpel. "Your medical text taught me so much," she said, kneeling beside him. "Anatomy, precision, where to cut to cause maximum pain without immediate death." What followed was clinical brutality. Delilah performed a crude castration using his own surgical tools, mimicking the procedures he'd inflicted on slaves without anesthesia. Peabody screamed into the gag until his voice broke. She didn't rush. Let him experience every second of agony he'd caused others. "How does it feel, Doctor?" she asked. "This pain you claim we didn't experience." Additional cuts, non-lethal but excruciating, small incisions across his torso, mimicking the vivisections he'd performed on living slaves for science. After 8 minutes, she ended it, deep cut across the femoral artery. He'd bled out in 3 minutes. Before leaving, Delilah took one of his medical texts, the anatomy book she'd studied, Evidence and Trophy. She cleaned the scalpel, returned it to his instrument tray, and left through the same unlocked door. 3 down, 2 to go. By Wednesday morning, panic consumed St. Mary Parish. 3 prominent white men dead in 3 nights. All mutilated identically, all connected. They dined together Friday nights, shared slaves, conducted business together. The pattern was obvious. Sheriff Johnson convened an emergency meeting with every plantation owner within 20 miles. 50 white men crowded into Franklin's courthouse, armed and terrified. "This is an insurrection," Colonel Montgomery called well said, standing to address the room. "Remember Nat Turner, remember the rebellions. This is how it starts, targeting white leadership." But Turner had followers, another planter argued. "This seems to be one person. One person today," Caldwell countered. "Tomorrow, who knows how many might follow this example," Sheriff Johnson said. "We're implementing immediate measures. Martial law across the parish, curfew for all slaves." 6 p.m. sharp. No gatherings. No movement between plantations. Patrols increased. Anyone suspicious gets questioned thoroughly. And the women, someone asked, what about them? The murders are specific, intimate. Has to be someone with access, someone they trusted. House slaves, women, murmurs of agreement. Question every house slave again, Johnson ordered. Especially the women, use whatever methods necessary. That afternoon, slave women across the parish were dragged to interrogation rooms, whipped, beaten, threatened with burning, drowning, sailed to Mississippi's brutal cotton plantations. No one broke. The code among slaves was ironclad. Never betray your own, especially when defending against white violence. Delilah was questioned twice Wednesday, once in the morning, once in the evening. You're educated, Sheriff Johnson said during the second interrogation. You can read. Whitmore confirmed it, said you sneak reading lessons. Delilah said nothing. These murders required intelligence, planning, medical knowledge. You cleaned Dr. Peabody's office. Still silence. Johnson leaned close. I know it's you. I can't prove it yet, but I will. Delilah met his eyes. A dangerous move for a slave, but she'd already crossed every line. Sir, if I may speak, go ahead. 3 white men are dead. The whole parish is searching for the killer. And you think a slave woman, someone you consider property, someone with no rights, no power, somehow outsmarted 3 armed men. And all of you, perhaps the killer is someone you haven't considered. Someone white, someone who wanted these specific men dead for business or personal reasons. It was a calculated risk, redirect suspicion. Johnson steadied her. You're clever. I'll give you that. Just trying to help, sir. He waved her away. Get out, but I'm watching you. Delilah returned to her cabin, knowing time was running short. To more targets, she'd have to move faster. Wednesday night, Montgomery Caldwell. Montgomery Caldwell lived alone at Sweetwater Estate since his second wife's accidental death 6 months prior. The house staff was minimal, just 3 house slaves and a cook. Wednesday was Caldwell's usual night to request Delilah's company. He'd sent word to Whitmore Tuesday afternoon. Send Delilah tomorrow evening. I need proper company. Code. Everyone knew what it meant. Delilah arrived at Sweetwater Estate at 7 p.m., carrying a basket of fresh bread from Riverside Hall's kitchen. Mistress Whitmore's attempt at maintaining neighborly relations despite the terror. Caldwell greeted her at the door himself, unusual for a master, but explainable. He dismissed his house slaves early, wanting privacy. Delilah, come in, come in. His voice was jovial, but his eyes held the predatory gleam she knew too well. The house was dark except for lamplight in the parlor and dining room. Mahogany furniture, Persian rugs, oil paintings of Caldwell ancestors, wealth built on suffering. I've prepared dinner, Caldwell said, gesturing to the dining table to place settings, as if this were a romantic engagement rather than ownership asserting itself. Delilah had prepared for this. Hidden in the bread basket, wrapped in cloth beneath the loaves, was a small vial of oleander extract, enough to cause severe illness, but not immediate death, and beneath her dress, strapped to her thigh, was her knife. You'll dine with me, Caldwell said, not a request. He enjoyed the illusion that his slave companions chose to be there. Yes, sir. She served the meal, roasted chicken, potatoes, greens, and wine. A bottle of Bordeaux Caldwell had been saving. Delilah poured his glass, adding 3 drops of oleander extract while his back was turned. The poison worked slowly. Oleander caused nausea, irregular heartbeat, confusion. Not immediately fatal, but debilitating. They ate. Caldwell talked about cotton prices, parish politics, his theories about the murders. Probably some jealous overseer. He mused, white man's grudge. Can't be slaves. They lack the capacity for such planning. Delilah nodded, smiled, said, yes, sir, at appropriate intervals. By the second glass of wine, Caldwell's speech began to slur. Not from alcohol, from poison. Feel strange, he mumbled, gripping the table. Sir, Delilah stood, feigning concern. Should I fetch a doctor? No, just dizzy. His vision blurred, heartbeat irregular, classical Leander symptoms. He tried to stand, stumbled. Delilah caught him, supporting his weight. Let me help you to bed. Sir, she guided him upstairs to his bedroom, his legs barely functioning. He collapsed on the bed, gasping. What's happening? Delilah locked the bedroom door, turned to face him. Oleander, she said simply, from your garden. Beautiful flowers, deadly when concentrated. Caldwell's eyes widened in horror. You poison. You've been raping me for 3 years, Delilah said, her voice eerily calm. Every Wednesday when you requested my company, you prefer young girls. The younger the better. There's a 14-year-old girl in your quarters you've been watching. She would have been next. She pulled the knife from beneath her dress. Caldwell tried to move, but couldn't. The poison had weakened him too much. Please, he gasped. I'll free you. Money. Your promises mean nothing. Your life means nothing. Delilah approached the bed. Caldwell was helpless, poisoned, weak, unable to defend himself. You like making people powerless, she said. So here's powerlessness. The castration was efficient, Caldwell screamed, but the house was empty, isolated. No one would hear. She didn't wait for him to bleed out. Instead, she pressed a pillow over his face, holding it firm despite his feeble struggles. 3 minutes, his body went limp. Delilah removed the pillow, checked his pulse. Dead. She cleaned her knife, straightened her dress, and unlocked the bedroom door, walked downstairs, extinguished the lamps, and left Sweetwater estate through the back entrance. The night was humid, thick with the scent of magnolia and approaching rain. 4 down, 1 to go. Thursday morning brought thunder. Montgomery Caldwell's body was discovered by his cook at dawn. She'd entered through the kitchen, found the dining room still set from dinner, climbed the stairs calling for her master. What she found sent her running into the field screaming. By 9 o'clock a.m., Sheriff Johnson stood in Caldwell's bedroom, staring at the 4th mutilated body in 4 days. This time, the method was different. Poison and suffocation in addition to castration, escalating. Dr. Reed Thompson, the new doctor since Peabody was dead, noted. Whoever this is, they're becoming more confident, more elaborate, or running out of time, Johnson said. He turned to his deputies. How many white men dined together regularly with all 4 victims? One deputy checked his notes. 5 total. Whitmore, Caldwell, Peabody, Rutherford, and Blackwood. All dead except Whitmore, Johnson finished. He's next. Has to be. They rode to Riverside Hall at full gallop. Master Borgard Whitmore was in his study when Sheriff Johnson burst through the door. You're the target, Johnson said without preamble. For dead, all your Friday companions, you're the last. Whitmore's face went pale. That's impossible. We're searching every slave. Clearly not thoroughly enough. Johnson crossed the study, locked the windows. You're staying in this room under guard until we catch the killer. No exceptions, but I have a plantation to run. You have a life to preserve, Johnson snapped. For men are dead, mutilated, killed in their own homes by someone who knew their routines, their vulnerabilities, their schedules. Someone with access. Understanding dawned on Whitmore's face. You think it's one of my slaves. I think it's one of the women you 5 men shared. Whitmore laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. Impossible. Their property, they can't. Plan, execute, hate. Johnson leaned close. Underestimating your enemy is how 4 men died. Don't be the 5th. Guards were posted outside Whitmore's study. 2 deputies armed with rifles. No one entered without clearance. The plantation was locked down. All slaves confined to quarters. Movement forbidden. Sheriff Johnson began systematic reinterrogations starting with house slaves. Delilah was brought to the overseer's cabin, now empty since Blackwood's death. Johnson sat across from her, a deputy standing behind with a whip. For nights, for deaths, Johnson said. Where were you each night? In my cabin, sir. Anyone verify that? Other women hear me singing spirituals before sleep, sir. Every night. Most nights, sir. Johnson studied her. You're educated. You can read. You worked with Dr. Peabody. You have access to this house, to Caldwell's estate, to everywhere the murders occurred. Delilah kept her expression neutral. Many house slaves have access, sir. But you're special, aren't you? Beautiful. The kind of woman these men would have. He paused, choosing words carefully. Taken liberties with. Sir, I don't understand. Don't lie to me. Johnson slammed his hand on the table. I know what happened at those Friday dinners. Everyone knows those 5 men used you, used multiple women, and now they're dead. Delilah said nothing. This is revenge, Johnson continued. Someone they violated, someone who planned meticulously, someone smart enough to evade detection this long. He leaned forward. If you confess now, I'll make sure your death is quick, painless. But if you make me prove it, if you cost more white lives, I'll make sure you burn slowly. Delilah met his eyes. A dangerous thing, but she was past fear. Sir, I'm just a slave. If I could kill white men and evade an entire parish of armed searches, wouldn't that make me more than property? Wouldn't that mean I'm human, intelligent, capable, worthy of rights you claim I don't have? The logic hung in the air. Johnson stared at her. You're clever. I'll give you that. And if I am the killer, Delilah continued, voice soft. Wouldn't I have already killed Master Whitmore? Why wait? Why let you post guards? Doesn't that suggest you're wrong? It was calculated misdirection. Make them think the pattern was broken, that Whitmore was safe now, Johnson considered. Perhaps, or perhaps you're buying time. He waved her away. Go, but you're under watch every moment. Delilah returned to her cabin, aware of the deputy following at a distance. She had one problem. Whitmore was now guarded, isolated. Getting to him would be nearly impossible. But nearly impossible wasn't the same as impossible. Thursday night, September 8, 1858, Master Borgard Whitmore sat in his study, surrounded by guards. He'd been locked inside for 12 hours, growing increasingly paranoid and agitated. At 9 p.m., he requested his usual bourbon. Delilah was the one who prepared it. She'd been cooking and serving for 20 years. The guards checked the bottle sealed, checked the glass clean, and allowed her to deliver it. Delilah entered the study carrying a silver tray, bourbon bottle, crystal glass, small pitcher of water. Whitmore sat behind his massive oak desk, pistol within reach. 2 guards stood outside the door. Your bourbon, master, Delilah said, setting the tray down. Whitmore eyed her suspiciously. You pour it. She did, adding exactly 2 fingers of bourbon, a splash of water. His preference, she handed him the glass. You drink first, he ordered. Delilah took a small sip, swallowed, waited. 30 seconds passed. Nothing happened. Whitmore relaxed slightly, took the glass, and drank. The bourbon was clean. Delilah hadn't poisoned it. She didn't need to. She'd been preparing for this moment for 10 years. Delilah knew Whitmore's routine. Bourbon from 9 o'clock p.m. to 11 p.m., then to bed. The guards would escort him upstairs, check his room, and post themselves outside. But Whitmore's bedroom had a secret. During her 20 years at Riverside Hall, Delilah had discovered something the master didn't think slaves noticed. The big house had been built with a hidden servants' passage. Narrow hallways behind walls designed so slaves could move between floors without being seen by guests. A relic from the house's construction in 1820. The passage accessed several rooms, including the master bedroom. There was a panel behind the wardrobe, lockable from inside, but easily opened from the passage if you knew where to press. Delilah knew at 11:15 p.m. After guards had escorted Whitmore to his bedroom and checked the space, but not behind the wardrobe. Why would they? They posted themselves outside. At 11:30 p.m., Whitmore extinguished his lamp and climbed into bed. At 11:45 p.m., Delilah entered the servants' passage from the kitchen, climbed the narrow stairs, and emerged on the third floor. She moved in complete darkness. She memorized every step, every board that creaked. She reached the panel behind Whitmore's wardrobe, pressed the hidden latch. It clicked softly. She waited. No sound from the bedroom. Delilah pushed the panel open slowly, inch by inch. The wardrobe stood slightly away from the wall, enough space to slip through. She entered Whitmore's bedroom. Moonlight streamed through windows, illuminating the massive four-poster bed. Whitmore's form was visible beneath silk sheets, chest rising and falling in sleep. Delilah stood at the foot of the bed, knife in hand, and spoke quietly, "Master Whitmore." He woke instantly, fumbling for the pistol on his knitstand. Looking for this, Delilah held up the pistol. She'd removed it minutes earlier while he slept. Whitmore's face went pale. "How did you?" "The guards are outside, guarding a door I didn't use." She moved closer. Whitmore scrambled backward in bed, pressing against the headboard. "You can scream," Delilah said. "They'll hear you. They'll break down the door, but I'll cut your throat before they reach you. So decide quickly." Whitmore didn't scream. "Smart," Delilah said. For once, she climbed onto the bed, knife pressed to his throat. With her other hand, she pulled rope from beneath her dress. She'd prepared carefully. "Hands," she ordered, "please." Hands trembling, Whitmore extended his wrists. Delilah bound them to the bedpost. Tight. Professional knots old Moses had taught her years ago. Then his ankles, then a gag. Whitmore was secured, helpless, exactly as she'd been 156 times. "Now," Delilah said, sitting beside him on the bed, "we have time. The guards won't check until morning, so let's talk." She reached under the bed and pulled out a glass jar. She'd hidden it there earlier during cleaning. Inside were for preserved objects. Whitmore's eyes went wide. "Recognize these." Delilah held the jar up to moonlight. "Blackwood, Rutherford, Peabody, Caldwell. I kept souvenirs." She set the jar on the knitstand where Whitmore could see it. "Your last," she continued, "and you deserve something special. Because you were the worst, you bought me. You used me first. You invited your friends to share. You ordered the whipping that killed my third baby." Tears streamed down Whitmore's face. "I want you to understand something," Delilah said. "I didn't become a monster. You created one, for 10 years. You and your friends violated me 156 times. I carved a notch for each one. Want to see?" She pulled out a small piece of wood from her pocket, the floorboard section with 156 notches carved carefully. 156 times I was raped, 3 pregnancies, 3 dead babies. 0 justice, 0 protection, 0 humanity granted to me. She set down the wood and picked up her knife. "So tonight, I take back my humanity by proving I'm not property. I'm a person capable of rage, planning, and justice." What followed lasted 40 minutes. Delilah didn't rush. This was the culmination of 10 years of suffering. Every cut was deliberate. Every moment of pain was earned. She started with his hands, the hands that had held her down, small cuts on each finger. Then his arms, his chest, his stomach. Whitmore writhed, screamed into the gag. No one heard. The study was far from guard posts. Thick walls muffled sound. Delilah worked with surgical precision using techniques learned from Peabody's texts. She knew how to cause maximum pain without causing immediate death. "Your friends died quickly," she told him. "Blackwood in 12 minutes, Rutherford in 23, Peabody in 8, Caldwell in 3. She moved lower. "But you get to suffer as long as I did." Every minute of those 10 years compressed into one night. The castration was slow, methodical, agonizing. Whitmore's muffled screams became silent. He passed out twice. Delilah revived him with cold water. "No," she whispered. "You stay conscious. You feel everything." At the 35-minute mark, she showed him the jar again. See your friends, you're joining them. Final cut, femoral artery, blood poured. Delilah sat beside him, holding his hand almost tenderly as life drained away. This is for every slave woman you touch, she said softly. Every child you sold, every family you destroyed, every human you treated as property. Whitmore's eyes glazed, breath rattled, stopped. Delilah checked his pulse. Nothing. She cut a lock of his hair, a final trophy, and added it to her collection. Then she cleaned her knife, collected the jar, straightened the room, and slipped back through the servants' passage. By midnight, she was in her cabin, knife hidden, evidence buried. She lay on her cot staring at the ceiling. 5 men dead, 10 years avenged, 3 babies honored. She felt empty, not satisfied, not happy, just empty. The rage that had sustained her for a decade was gone, burned out like a fire that consumed all fuel. In the morning, they would discover Whitmore's body. The investigation would intensify. She would probably be caught, but she completed her mission. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 10 years, slept without nightmares. Friday morning, September 9th, 1858, 6 o'clock a.m. The guard knocked on Whitmore's door for morning check. No answer. He knocked again. Nothing. He tried the handle, locked from inside. Master Whitmore, he called. Sir, you need to unlock the door. Silence. Growing concerned, the guards broke down the door. What they found would haunt them forever. Master Beauregard Whitmore III lay on his blood-soaked bed, mutilated beyond recognition. The same pattern as the previous 4 victims, but worse, far worse. On the nightstand sat a glass jar containing 5 objects. 1 guard vomited. The other ran for Sheriff Johnson. By 8 a.m., the entire parish knew. All 5 men, the Friday Dinner Club, the pillars of St. Mary Parish Society, were dead, murdered systematically over 7 nights. Sheriff Johnson stood in Whitmore's bedroom, staring at the carnage. He'd been wrong. The guards had been wrong. Everyone had underestimated the killer. The servants' passage, a deputy said, pointing to the open panel behind the wardrobe. Must have come through there. Who knew about it? House slaves. Anyone who worked here long enough. Johnson closed his eyes. He'd been right about one thing. This was personal. This was revenge. And it was a woman. Bring me Delilah, he said quietly. They came for her at 9 o'clock a.m. Delilah didn't resist, didn't run. She'd known this moment was coming. She was dragged to the big house parlor where Sheriff Johnson waited. It was you, he said. Not a question, a statement. Delilah said nothing. I can't prove it. You're too clever. Covered your tracks too well, but I know. Delilah met his eyes. Then arrest me. On what evidence? Everything is circumstantial. No witnesses. No murder weapon found. No confession. Then release me. Johnson laughed bitterly. You know I can't. 5 white men are dead. Someone has to pay. He stood, walked to the window. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to question every slave on this plantation again. Someone will break. Someone will talk. And when they do, you'll hang. And if no one talks, then I'll hang someone anyway. Example must be made. Delilah's voice was cold. So justice doesn't matter. Only vengeance. How very white of you. Johnson turned sharply. You dare what? Speak truth. I have nothing to lose. You're going to kill me regardless. They stared at each other. Finally, Johnson spoke. Did you do it? Delilah smiled. A small, terrible smile. Does it matter? Yes. Why? Because if you did, you're the most dangerous person I've ever met, and I need to know if there are more like you. Delilah leaned forward. Sheriff, there are 200 slaves on this plantation. Thousands across Louisiana, millions across the South. Every single one has been violated, brutalized, dehumanized. How many do you think are like me? How many are planning, waiting? How many are willing to die if it means taking their oppressors with them? She paused. So yes, Sheriff, there are more like me, many more, and you should be terrified. Johnson's face went pale. "Lock her up," he ordered the deputies. "Tomorrow we start interrogations." But no one did. Over the next 3 days, Sheriff Johnson and his deputies questioned every slave at Riverside Hall. They used threats, whips, promises of freedom. Nothing worked. The slave community closed ranks. No one betrayed Delilah. Young Moses, the blacksmith's son, was beaten until unconscious. He said nothing. Old Sarah the cook was burned with hot irons. She said nothing. Even the children, threatened with sale to Mississippi, stayed silent. Finally, on September 12th, Sheriff Johnson made a decision. "We can't prove it in court," he told the assembled plantation owners. "No physical evidence, no witnesses, no confession, but we all know she did it. So what do we do?" Cornelius Peabody Jr., the doctor's son, demanded. "Let her go." "No, we make an example, without trial." "Since when do slaves get trials?" Johnson replied coldly, "We'll hold a tribunal." Present circumstantial evidence. Let a jury of plantation owners decide. They'll convict. Then we hang her publicly. It was decided. The trial was held September 15, 1858 in Franklin's courthouse. All-white jury, all men, all slave owners. The prosecution presented its case. Delilah had access, opportunity, and motive. She'd been intimate with all 5 victims the prosecutor delicately avoided saying raped by. She had medical knowledge from working with Dr. Peabody. She was educated, dangerous and a slave. The defense, court-appointed, half-hearted, argued lack of physical evidence. The jury deliberated 7 minutes, guilty on all counts. Judge Rutherford, the slave trader's brother, pronounced sentence. Death by hanging, public execution, September 22, 1858. "May God have mercy on your soul." Delilah stood. The courtroom expected begging, crying, pleading. Instead, she spoke clearly and firmly. "You call me murderer, monster. You say I killed 5 innocent men. But let me tell you about innocence. Master Whitmore purchased me at 18 because I was beautiful. For 10 years, he and his 4 friends raped me 156 times. I counted. I carved a notch for each violation. I was pregnant 3 times. 3 times Dr. Peabody cut my babies out of me without anesthesia. 2 weeks ago, Overseer Blackwood whipped me while pregnant until I miscarried on the whipping post." Master Whitmore laughed, said, "Problem solved. Your laws offered me no protection, no justice, no humanity. I was property, a thing to be used and discarded. So yes, I killed them, all 5, and I would do it again. I castrated them because they used those parts to violate me. I made them suffer because they made me suffer for 10 years. I showed them no mercy because they showed me none. You call this murder, I call it justice. You say I'm a monster, but I ask you, which is worse? A woman who kills 5 men who raped her 156 times, or a system that makes that legal, that calls her property, that denies her humanity? I am not sorry, I am not repentant. Given the choice between submission and resistance, I chose resistance. Given the choice between dying a slave or dying free, I choose free. Hang me if you must, but know this, I am not alone. Every slave woman in this room has suffered what I suffered. Every slave man has watched his wife, daughter, sister be violated and could do nothing. We are millions, and we remember everything. You can kill me, but you cannot kill what I represent. The idea that slaves are human, that we feel pain, that we desire freedom, that we can fight back. One day, maybe not this year, maybe not this decade, but one day every chain will break, every whip will burn, every master will face judgment. And when that day comes, remember my name, Delilah. Remember that one woman armed only with rage and a kitchen knife made 5 powerful men pay for their crimes. If I am evil, I was made evil by you. If I am a monster, you created me, so hang me, make me an example. But know that every slave watching will learn this lesson. Resistance is possible. Victory is achievable, and death with dignity is better than life without it. I am Delilah, I am free, and I fear nothing you can do to me. Silence filled the courtroom. Even hardened slave owners were shaken. Some looked uncomfortable, a few looked afraid. Judge Rutherford banged his gavel, "Remove her." But the words hung in the air, spreading like fire. September 22nd, 1858. Dawn gray and heavy. Rain threatened but held off. The gallows had been erected in Franklin's town square. 2,000 people gathered. White folks in front, slaves forced to attend in back. Delilah was led from her cell at 10 a.m. hands bound, wearing a simple white dress. She walked with her head high. No tears, no begging, the crowd jeered. Some threw rotten vegetables. Delilah didn't flinch. She climbed the 13 steps to the platform. The hangman, a professional brought from Baton Rouge, placed a noose around her neck. Sheriff Johnson stood nearby. Any last words? Delilah looked out at the crowd, at the white faces jeering, at the black faces silently crying. She spoke loudly, clearly, "To my brothers and sisters in chains, remember me. Remember that we are human, that we can fight, that freedom is worth any price. To the white men and women watching, sleep lightly. Check your food, lock your doors, because there are more like me, many more, and we are tired of suffering. My name is Delilah. I killed 5 demons. I die free, and I go gladly." The hangman placed the hood over her head. The trap door opened. The rope snapped taut. Delilah's neck broke instantly, a rare mercy. She died without suffering, unlike the 156 times she'd suffered violations. Her body hung for 3 days as a warning, but the warning backfired among the slave community. Delilah became legend immediately. That night in secret gatherings across Louisiana, her story spread. She killed 5 masters. She was never sorry. She died free. A new spiritual was composed. Singing coded language white folks didn't understand. Sister Delilah, she brought the house down. Like Samson before, she tore evil down. 5 pillars fell before her might. She walked to glory in the morning light. The song spread across the South. Within a year, slaves in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia were singing it. Delilah's story inspired others. Within 6 months of her execution, 3 more plantation owners in Louisiana died under suspicious circumstances. Were the deaths related? Impossible to prove, but white masters grew paranoid. Insurance rates for plantation owners skyrocketed. Some smaller farmers sold their slaves and moved to cities. Security costs increased dramatically. Locks on doors, guards at night, food tasters. The fear Delilah instilled lived on. The historical record shows what happened next. Immediate aftermath. Riverside Hall plantation never recovered. Without Whitmore, it fell into disrepair. By 1860, it was sold at auction. The other 4 plantations faced similar decline. Fear made it hard to keep slaves productive. Sheriff Johnson became obsessed with preventing another Delilah incident. He instituted brutal crackdowns that made him hated even among white communities. Broader impact. Abolitionist newspapers in the North seized on Delilah's story. Frederick Douglass wrote about her in the North Star. When law offers no protection, humans create their own justice. Delilah's actions were brutal, but no more brutal than the system that created her. Southern apologists tried to suppress the story, but it spread anyway through slave networks and sympathetic journalists. The case became a rallying point for abolitionists. This is what slavery creates, violence breeding violence. Long-term legacy. During the Civil War 1861 to 1865, Union soldiers heard the Delilah song from freed slaves. It became an unofficial anthem of resistance. After emancipation, elderly former slaves who'd witnessed Delilah's execution told their grandchildren, "She died so we could be free. Remember her." In the 20th century, civil rights activists rediscovered Delilah's story. She became a symbol of Black women's resistance against sexual violence and oppression. Historical documentation, Court records from her trial survive at Louisiana State Archives. Newspaper accounts from 1858, both Southern and Northern, documented the murders and execution. Oral histories collected in the 1930s from former slaves mentioned the woman who killed 5 masters and died in Broken. Today, Delilah's story teaches us about oppression. When you strip humans of all legal protection, when you treat them as property, when you violate them repeatedly, you don't create submission. You create rage, and that rage will find expression eventually. About resistance, even the powerless can resist. Even one person armed with intelligence and determination can shake a system. About justice, when official justice fails, humans create their own. Delilah received no protection from law, church, or society. So she became her own judge, jury, and executioner about the cost, resistance cost. Delilah paid with her life, but she chose death with dignity over life in degradation. That choice, that agency was her ultimate act of freedom. About gender and race, Delilah's story highlights the specific horrors Black women faced under slavery. Sexual violence was systematic, legal, and unpunished. Her revenge was against both racism and sexism, twin oppressions that made her life hell. About legacy, Delilah lived 28 years, but her impact lasted generations. Her story inspired countless others to resist, to fight, to refuse submission. She proved that one person can matter even when the system says they're nobody. The 5 men who died, Master Borgard Whitmore III, 52, died September 8, 1858, buried at Riverside Cemetery. No one tends his grave. Jacob Blackwood, 38, died September 3, 1858, buried in pauper section, grave marker long gone. Cornelius Rutherford, 44, died September 5, 1858, buried at family plot in Natchez. Records show he separated 200 plus families during his career. Dr. Thaddeus Peabody, 55, died September 6, 1858. His medical research was later discredited entirely. His published papers are now studied as examples of scientific racism. Montgomery Caldwell, 48, died September 7, 1858. Both his wives died under suspicious circumstances. No investigation was ever conducted. The woman who avenged herself, Delilah, last name never recorded. Slaves weren't given surnames. Born approximately 1830, purchased 1848. Executed September 22, 1858, age 28. Her body was buried in an unmarked grave in the Black section of Franklin Cemetery, but her story never died. In 2018, 160 years after her execution, a historical marker was placed in Franklin, Louisiana. Near this site, September 22, 1858, a woman known as Delilah was executed for the deaths of 5 white men who had repeatedly raped her during 3 years of enslavement. Her final words, "I die free," became a rallying cry for generations of freedom fighters. We remember her courage and mourn the system that forced her to such desperate measures. The marker was controversial. Some white residents opposed it, but Black community activists fought for its installation. Today, every September 22nd, a small ceremony is held at the marker. Descendants of slaves, activists, and historians gather to remember Delilah. They sing the spiritual composed in her honor. They say her name. They refuse to let her be forgotten. This story is about more than revenge. It's about human dignity under impossible conditions. The right to self-defense when law offers no protection. The specific trauma of sexual violence under slavery. One woman's refusal to die without justice. The power of resistance even when it costs everything. The legacy that outlives death. Delilah wasn't perfect. Her methods were brutal. Her actions were illegal, but she was human, fully, completely human in a system that denied her humanity. She fought back when fighting back was impossible. She chose freedom when freedom meant death. She inspired millions when inspiring anyone seemed impossible. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, that's the point. History isn't just dates and facts, it's people. Real people who suffered, fought, loved, lost, and sometimes rarely, but sometimes won. Delilah's victory wasn't survival, it was agency. For 1 week in 1858, she wasn't property, she was power. Leave a like if you believe her story deserves to be remembered. Comment below, was this justice or murder? Can the two be the same? Share this video so others can learn what textbooks don't teach. Subscribe for more untold stories of resistance throughout American history. Remember, freedom was never given. It was always taken with blood, courage, and the refusal to accept less than full humanity. Delilah took hers with a knife and determination forged in 10 years of hell. Her name was Delilah. She was 28 years old. She killed 5 men who raped her 156 times, and she died free. Never forget her. Final reflection. The weight of truth. In 1858, Louisiana was 3 years away from seceding from the Union. The Civil War loomed. The entire Southern economy, cotton, sugar, tobacco, rested on the backs of 4 million enslaved people. Those 4 million people weren't passive. They resisted constantly through work slowdowns, tool breaking, running away, and yes, sometimes through violence. Delilah's story is exceptional in its brutality and success. But it's not unique in its motivation. Every plantation had women like Delilah, women who endured sexual violence as a routine part of slavery. The historical record is full of testimonies from freed slaves describing this horror. Harriet Jacobs wrote in Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, 1861, "Slavery is terrible for men, but it is far more terrible for women." Frederick Douglass acknowledged in his autobiographies that slave women face horrors beyond what men experience. While interviews with former slaves in the 1930s documented countless stories of sexual abuse, forced breeding, and the complete absence of legal protection. What made Delilah extraordinary wasn't her suffering, that was tragically common. What made her extraordinary was her refusal to accept it silently. The questions we must ask: was Delilah justified? From a legal standpoint in 1858, absolutely not. She murdered 5 white men under Louisiana law. That was unforgivable regardless of circumstance. From a moral standpoint, here's where it gets complicated. She had no legal recourse. Slaves couldn't testify in court against white people. There was no mechanism for justice. The law explicitly permitted masters to do whatever they wanted with their property, including sexual violence. If a person has zero legal protection and suffers repeated violent assault, do they have the right to self-defense? Most modern legal systems say yes, but those systems didn't exist for slaves. Delilah waited 3 years and 156 assaults before acting. That's not hot-blooded murder. That's calculated execution after exhausting all other options, of which there were none. So, was she justified? Each person must answer that for themselves. Were her methods too brutal? The castration, the specific violence she inflicted, was symbolic. She targeted the instruments of her violation. Was it excessive by modern standards? Yes. By the standards of a woman who'd been violated 156 times, who'd lost 3 children, who'd been whipped until she miscarried. Perhaps it made perfect sense to her. Violence always begets violence. The brutality of slavery created brutal resistance. We can condemn both while understanding the causal relationship. Should we celebrate her? This is perhaps the hardest question. Delilah killed 5 people. Killing is wrong. But those 5 people had committed 156 plus acts of rape, killed 3 unborn children, and participated in a system that dehumanized millions. We can acknowledge her courage without glorifying murder. We can understand her rage without endorsing violence. We can remember her story as a testament to human resilience under impossible conditions while still wishing the violence had never been necessary. Delilah shouldn't have had to become a killer. In a just world, she would have lived free, raised her children, and died old in peace. But she didn't live in a just world. She lived in 1858 Louisiana, and she made the only choice that felt available to her. What does her story tell us about today? Slavery ended in 1865, but its legacy remains. Mass incarceration disproportionately affects Black Americans. Some call it slavery by another name. Sexual violence against Black women continues at alarming rates. Economic inequality traces directly to slavery's theft of generational wealth. Systemic racism in housing, education, healthcare, and criminal justice perpetuates disadvantages created by slavery. Delilah's story reminds us that oppression doesn't create submission. It creates rage, and that rage seeks outlet. The question for any society is, will you address injustice before it explodes into violence? Or will you ignore it until people feel they have no choice but Delilah's path? The others' untold stories of resistance. Delilah wasn't alone. History records many others. Celia, Missouri, 1855, enslaved woman who killed her master after 5 years of rape. She was 19. She was convicted and hanged while pregnant. Her case went to Missouri Supreme Court. She lost. Margaret Garner, Kentucky, 1856, escaped slave who, when caught, killed her own daughter, then let her be returned to slavery. Toni Morrison based Beloved on her story. Nat Turner, Virginia, 1831, led the most famous slave rebellion, killing approximately 60 white people. He was caught and executed, but his rebellion terrified slave owners for generations. Gabriel Prosser, Virginia, 1800, organized a slave rebellion involving potentially 1,000 people betrayed before execution. He and 25 others were hanged. Denmark Vesey, South Carolina, 1822. Free Black man who organized massive slave rebellion in Charleston, betrayed before execution. He and 34 others were hanged. Harriet Tubman, Maryland to Canada, 1849 to 1860, made 13 missions to rescue approximately 70 enslaved people via Underground Railroad. Carried a gun and said she'd shoot any slave who tried to turn back. Freedom or death, no middle ground. These stories, and thousands more never recorded, show a consistent pattern. Enslaved people resisted constantly, sometimes through escape, sometimes through rebellion, sometimes through violence. The myth of the happy slave is exactly that, a myth. Slavery was brutality and it generated resistance. For white readers, if you're white and this story made you uncomfortable, good, it should. Your ancestors were people who looked like your ancestors built wealth on slavery, not might have, did. The entire American economy from 1619 to 1865 was built on enslaved labor. That wealth was inherited generationally. Your family may not have owned slaves, but white Americans as a group benefited from a system that excluded Black Americans from wealth accumulation for 250 years. Then another 100 years of Jim Crow, then decades of redlining, discriminatory lending, and systemic racism. Delilah's rage. That rage didn't die with her, it lives in her descendants. In every Black American who knows their ancestors were raped, murdered, and dehumanized, and that the perpetrators were never punished. You can't change the past, but you can acknowledge it honestly. Teach your children the truth. Support reparations. Support systemic change. Listen when Black Americans speak about ongoing injustice. Use your privilege to dismantle racist systems. Discomfort is the beginning of change. Don't run from it. Lean into it. For Black readers, if you're Black and this story resonated, you're not alone. Your ancestors survived unimaginable horror. They were strong, they resisted, they fought, they endured. Delilah represents one form of resistance. There were many others, those who escaped via Underground Railroad, those who learned to read despite laws forbidding it, those who preserved African culture, language, and spirituality, those who protected their children however they could, those who survived day by day, year by year. You come from survivors, from resistors, from people who refuse to be broken. The trauma of slavery echoes through generations. That's real, that's documented. That's called intergenerational trauma, but so does the strength. So does the resistance. So does the refusal to give up. Delilah's story isn't just about violence. It's about agency, about refusing to be property, about choosing death with dignity over life without it. You inherit that choice. Every day you choose dignity. Every day you resist. Every day you prove that your ancestors' sacrifices weren't in vain. Systems of oppression depend on silence. Slave owners wanted slaves to believe resistance was impossible. They used terror, violence, and propaganda to enforce submission. But stories like Delilah's prove it was never impossible, difficult, yes, deadly, often, but never impossible. Every authoritarian system, every oppressive regime, every unjust power structure relies on the oppressed believing they're powerless. They're not. One woman with a kitchen knife killed 5 powerful men and terrified an entire region. One woman's final words inspired generations. If Delilah could resist in 1858 Louisiana, arguably one of the most oppressive systems in human history, then resistance is always possible. The question is never, can we resist? The question is, what are we willing to risk? Delilah risked everything, lost everything, but she died free, and that mattered to her more than anything. In closing, this story is brutal. It's uncomfortable. It should be. American history includes genocide of Native Americans, enslavement of Africans, exploitation of immigrants, and systemic oppression of anyone not white, male, and wealthy. We can't change that history, but we can remember it accurately, learn from it, refuse to repeat it, build a more just future. Delilah's story matters because it's true, because she was real. Because her suffering was real, because her resistance was real, because her courage was real. Say her name, Delilah, remember her story. Share it, never let it be forgotten. Because the moment we forget the horrors of history, we become capable of repeating them. And because the moment we forget the resistance of history, we believe ourselves powerless. Delilah proved we're never powerless. Even when all odds are against us, even when death is certain, even when victory seems impossible, she fought. She won. Not survival, but dignity. And she died free. That's a victory worth remembering. If this story impacted you, like this video to tell the algorithm this history matters. Comment below. Was Delilah justified? What would you have done? Do you know other untold stories of resistance? Share this video with anyone who needs to know this history. Subscribe for more forgotten stories. The slave who poisoned 40 masters at a Christmas feast. The Underground Railroad conductor who killed 12 slave catchers. The plantation that burned with all its owners inside. The free woman who returned south to rescue 70 family members. Follow on social media for daily historical facts about resistance. These stories exist. They're documented, they're real, but they're not taught in schools. Why? Because uncomfortable truths are easier to forget than confront. This channel refuses to forget. Join us. Remember with us. Learn with us. Because those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And because those who died fighting for freedom deserve to be remembered. Delilah, age 28, died September 22, 1858. Raped 156 times, killed 5 oppressors, died free, never forgotten.